Hey, what's happening? Welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. I'm an acupuncturist, a love interventionist, a guy who's just out here trying to help other people find the flow by sharing some stories and some wisdom and things that have happened to me over 25 years of seeing dead people and energy fields and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I'm stoked that you're here today. I share a story about how everything began for me when it came to sensing energy or being more open. I don't think I've told this story on the podcast before, but if I have, well, here it is again. So I hope that you enjoy, especially if you're somebody out there who might not be turning the volume up on your intuition because you're afraid or you're scared or you're uncertain. It's definitely worth doing. In fact, I would say that it can really be a matter of life and death, that your health and your vitality can depend upon you being open, and shutting down what's possible as far as your connection goes might be leading to some dis-ease and some discomfort. So hopefully the story of my beginning and what that experience was like helps to give you a little bit more encouragement and confidence, and you can get out there and be in flow. So thank you as always for being here. You can check out the podcast. You can email the podcast at pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com. Hit me up on Instagram at James E. Rohr, and you can see all of my coaching stuff at invitinginlove.com. So without further ado, enjoy the show. So one of the questions that I've been asked a bunch over the course of my career is, how did I first get started sensing energy, or I don't know, feeling things, intuiting things, like whatever you want to call it. And it's a story that I don't tell a lot, not with all the nuances anyway, in part because some of them are a little scary. And I mean, at the time I was terrified. And what I don't like is this kind of attachment or fear of dark and negative energies, because typically people that are, especially spiritual teachers that are talking a lot about negative energy and dark spirits, they're usually pretty quick to sell you the protection. And I just find that for the most part, if there are dark or negative energies out there, the chances that they would want to have anything to do with you are pretty slim. And that spending so much time and focus and energy on protection and the fear that something horrible might happen to you, or that you're going to contact something really negative, is going to put that into the realm of possibilities, and you start feeding more and more of the things that might be not so productive and fun and easy. And so I just typically find that when I'm talking about these things, to focus on the positive stuff and to not even dwell too much on the things that could be negative or scary, or certainly this idea of curses and hexes and all of this kind of stuff. But my first experience was fairly terrifying. When I was about 15 or so, my mom we were renting a house and she wanted to buy a house. So I remember this one day, she and I were out cruising around going to open houses, and we pull up to this one house and there's just one car in the driveway. And my memory of the house was that even though it was a white house, that there was a little bit of some heavy energy, just kind of like a little darker maybe. And I remember when we walked in, the realtor was at the table, and he was shocked that anybody walked into the house. And he was really surprised that we were there. And he was like, we started looking around. It's a big house, spacious, got enough rooms for my brothers and sister and I and all the things. It was a nice big piece of property. There was a forest and trees out back. And the realtor was like, man, this house has been on the market for a year and a half, and it's a great house, nice lot. I don't know why it's just not getting any action. And I remember after we took a tour of the house, my mom and I went back out to her car, and we looked at each other, and I was like, I think this is our house. And my mom was like, yeah, I think this is our house too. So we end up moving into the house. And she gets the basement refinished turned it into my brother's bedroom. And it was one of these things where going into the basement, there were always cold spots. there were certain cold spots. They wouldn't always be in the same place, but it would feel like you were walking through, a wall of ice or, an invisible mist of just freezing cold air. And then, you take another step and it's gone. And years later, I would find out that my brother absolutely hated being in the basement, that he never felt good down there and things were always feeling kind of messed up to him. But I had no idea of that at the time. I just knew that I hated going to the basement, that going down there to like do the laundry and that stuff, I was just like always freaked out. And maybe I was like, well, I'm 15, like maybe I'm just afraid of the basement. But anyway, that was the experience. So this one day, my brother goes off to college. My mom has been studying with a spiritual teacher, this guy, not Carlos Castaneda, Alberto Villoldo is who she was studying with at the time. So she was off doing some of these like spiritual things, and I didn't really know what she was doing. I just knew that she was going away on, certain weekends and people would come stay with us and whatever. But somehow I ended up with a Carlos Castaneda book that I started reading. So I clearly had some kind of propensity toward energy or understanding more of what's out there. I wish I remembered how I got my hands on that book. But anyway, so this one day I was sitting in my brother's room. He was away at college. And I was reading this Carlos Castaneda book. And as I'm reading it, I was like kind of flipping ahead and I was like, all right, I'll read like another page or so and then I'll be done. And it was the first time that I ever heard a voice in my head that was like, no, you're not done. You won't be done then. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like what? That was like, it was a thought, but it wasn't like a thought in my own voice. It was a different energy to it. And so I'm reading and I get to the point where I said I was going to stop and I hear this voice that says, no, you're not done yet. You have to keep going. Keep reading. And I was like, wow, am I really going to do that? I don't know. So I keep reading. And then I was like, all right, I'm done now. And they're like, no, you have to keep reading. And I was like, well, who the fuck is talking to me? Like, what the fuck is this? Stop. Enough already. I'm done. And they were like, keep reading. And I was like, all right. So I flip through I keep reading. And then I finally get to this quote where it turns out to be a really famous quote of his. And I don't have it in front of me here, but he basically said something like, all paths traverse the mountain leading nowhere. So follow the path with heart. And as I read that, I felt this kind of swirling in my chest. And I stood up. And it was as though there was another energy in the room. I had been hearing a voice, but all of a sudden I became acutely aware of a presence in the room that was unlike anything that I've ever felt before when I was by myself. And I'm feeling this warmth spread across my chest. And in front of me, I see a white sort of apparition. It was vague. It wasn't detailed at all, but it was this, I don't know, it wasn't quite an orb. It was more hazy than that, but it was definitely white and it was in front of me. And I felt it kind of move to my right in like a semicircle. And then it went back and it moved to the left. And I'm standing there frozen, paralyzed, watching this thing moving in front of me. And I was like transfixed. I remember the book fell out of my hand. And I just stood there. And at some level, I knew that my life was forever changed. That I would never be the same again. The apparition didn't make any contact with me. I didn't feel it touch me. I didn't feel, any sort of attack or anything like that. In hindsight, it was a curiosity, probably more so than anything else, but I was freaked out. And we had this cat at the time who was pretty reclusive. He was never really around. He would usually hang out like in the family room or something. And when you would come up the basement stairs, the door would open into the kitchen, and there was a countertop that was if you kept going, you just sort of walk right into the countertop. So down in the basement, I'm watching this kind of energy move around me, and I'm feeling my chest just explode with warmth. And after, I don't know how long it was, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, the hypnosis broke, and I was able to free myself of this trance or this energy. And the book was on the ground. I kicked the footstool out of my way, and I run as fast as I can up the stairs. And when I burst open through the door, the cat was sitting right there on the countertop, staring at the door. And when I open the door and and I'm standing there in the kitchen, the cat makes eye contact with me and then immediately looks over my shoulder and comes back and makes eye contact with me and then over my shoulder. And this happens 2 or 3 more times. And again, I stood there like transfixed. It's like a horror movie where you're just like screaming at the character, like, close the door. And then finally, I broke from the trance with the cat, slammed the door shut, and I sat down at the kitchen table and I wept. I was bawling, sobbing. And I didn't really know why I was crying. I think about that moment often now that it's been, 25 years later. And this profound feeling of opening, of seeing maybe through the veil. I still don't know. But it was as though it's like I could feel my heart energy field being restructured somehow. It's bizarre. And I was crying. And my mom comes down. She sees me sobbing at the table and she goes, "Oh my God, what happened to you? Are you okay? What happened?" And like, my mom is super dope. So I just start explaining to her what happened, tell her the whole story. And she was like, "Oh my God." So she goes and she gets some sage and she starts burning some stuff. And she goes, "I want to make some phone calls for you." She goes, "But I can't do it right now because your little brother has a birthday party that I got to take him to, and it's at Chuck E. Cheese." She's like, "So we're leaving." And I was like, I'm not staying here. I can't stay here by myself." And my mom was like, "Well, you can come if you want, I guess." So after this like profound experience that I had where, I might've been crying for the first time in, 5 years. I mean, who knows the last time I was crying before that. I found myself about a half hour later sitting at Chuck E. Cheese. A giant mouse or rat or whatever he is and all of his gang. And man, I felt broken, really transformed. It was crazy. And over the next few weeks, my mom, we started getting these packages in the mail. She reached out to some of the people that she knew, and I was getting like medicine bag scent and sage and cedar and, all these different herbs and stones and all this stuff for energetic protection. And I didn't know anything about that stuff then, but it was coming, and I was, using it and burning it and trying to make peace and whatever. But the basement I was mortified, and I would feel this energy hanging around me, and it was terrifying. So fast forward, I don't know, maybe a month or two, and my mom goes away to another one of these weekends. And when she comes back, there's a man that's with her, and he's come to talk to me. And what I found out later had happened was that during this weekend, they did an eye-gazing exercise where my mom had to be partnered up with somebody that she didn't know, a stranger that was there in the group. And they were making eye contact, holding eye contact for a few minutes. And at the end of it, they would share what they felt during that experience. And the guy that my mom was partnered up with at the end of their time looks at her and he says, "You have a 15-year-old son who started seeing spirits, and it's really freaking him out. And he needs to visit with my other teacher." And so my mom was just like, holy shit, like, what? And she was like, well, he's like 15, so he's going to do whatever he wants. I can give you an introduction to him, and then you guys can take it from there. So this guy comes over to the house, and he starts talking to me about a bunch of stuff that I have no idea what he's talking about, spiritual protection and teachers and apprentices and like all this stuff. I have no idea. I grew up in like this affluent suburb, and, all this stuff was new to me. So eventually I meet his teacher, and, we're doing all sorts of cleansings. The guys come into the house, and we do house cleansings. We're like burning sage again. We're rattling, we're drumming, like all of this different stuff is going on as we're trying to cleanse the energy. And I ended up apprenticing to this Native American shaman, and he was teaching me the traditions and the ways, but I couldn't shake the energy of the house. So during this time, I started like seeing auras very clearly, which was also very wild. If you've listened to the podcast regularly, the story that I told about the trees talking to me happened during this time period. I was having visions of myself at Stanford, and I didn't know that it was Stanford. I had visions of myself at Machu Picchu. I mean, some crazy things were happening to me that were all good. And yet in the house, I felt rattled, especially when I had to go to the basement. There was this one time, maybe a year or so after that initial experience, I was down in the basement with my girlfriend at the time, and we were kind of fooling around a little bit, and we hear this voice that says, "Jim, oh Jim." Super creepy, like horror movie creepy. And I looked at Kate, and I was like, Kate, did you hear that? And she goes, yeah, someone was just calling your name. Sounds like your mom. And I was thinking, well, not really my mom. And she said it, and she goes, yeah, but it wasn't really like your mom. And I was like, oh my God. And so I call up to my mom to see if it was her, assuming that it was her, because up until this point, just about all of the things that had happened to me were all like in my head, or they were in my experience. And I'd get, there was some of the confirmation, like with the bees and the trees and whatever. And, I'd get some confirmation in other things, but I'd never had an experience where somebody else heard this voice. So I figured it was my mom, but it sounded weird, right? So I'm screaming up the stairs, like, Mom, what do you want? Like Will Ferrell in that movie, Wedding Crashers. Mom, the meatloaf. And there's no response. So I run upstairs, and I'm still screaming for my mom. No answer. I run up to the second floor, and I'm screaming like, Mom, what do you want? What do you want? And she comes out of the shower. She's just like, I've been in the shower. Why are you bothering me? What do you want? And I was like, well, I'm not bothering you. Just like, you were bothering me. You were calling me. And she goes, I didn't call you. I've been in the shower. So I've run back downstairs, and I'm like, Kate, get the hell out of the basement. Come up here. It was creepy, super creepy. So she comes up, and like, that's the end of it. We both are freaked out. She's like, I think I'm going to go home now. And it's like, I don't blame you. Can I go with you? So, I'm reaching out to my teacher, and, we're trying to like get to the bottom of this thing. We did like a total house cleansing, where the house ends up in this kind of vortex that's supposed to clear the energy, and like nothing was working. And then finally, I don't know, maybe it was 2 years after this initial experience, I decided that, I was just like, I had enough. I had enough of this, and I was feeling tormented by this energy. And so I had a buddy of mine who was also an apprentice come to the house, and we decided we were going to do a little ceremony. We were going to do a chanupa, which is the Native American pipe. It's a powerful, powerful tool for prayer and healing. So we set up the altar with this chanupa with the intention of blessing this energy and telling it to, it's time to leave. And our teacher had said, be clear about how you want to be communicated with, how you want to know that the spirit is gone. And he said, if I were you, I would suggest that it comes to you in a dream. It's easier to handle that way. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's a good idea, So we're sitting there with this chanupa. We're doing the intentions. We're in the basement, at the source of where it happened. And Somebody else that had been there in the house cleansing had said that they thought the energy was of a woman who had been raped, on the property somewhere and by somebody around, like in the late sort of teenage years, and that she was trying to contact me because it was like, she was still here because of the torment. And, I don't know. I never got a sense of that. I just felt like there was an energy that was around me that I did wanted nothing to do with anymore. And so we did a chanupa and, this prayer. And to be quite honest, during it, there wasn't anything really that spectacular. We made a couple of declarations, which now years later I recognize the power of a declaration. But, we made a couple of declarations, asked for the spirit to leave, and the energies to escort it to the light or to wherever it needs to go. And 3 days later, I had a dream where I'd never had a dream that was like this before, where I was in the house, and in the dream I go up to an attic that didn't really exist. In the dream it was a finished attic, and there was a clawfoot tub there, and inside the tub was a rotting, desiccated, flesh-covered skeleton of a woman, and she had an IV in her arm. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, you're the woman. You're this spirit that's been bothering me." She nodded and she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, you got to go. It's time for you to leave." And she said, "I know." And so this like rotting version of a woman pulls the IV out of her arm, and she stands up out of this clawfoot tub, and she looks at me one more time, and then she just walks through the walls of the attic, and I watch her walk as she goes like way off in the distance, towards some kind of light. And I stood there and I watched. And I felt the energy change around me. And the lighting in the dream also changed. And then I woke up, feeling for the first time in probably 2 years, free. It was a tremendous, tremendous thing that I can't even explain. I have theories and ideas, but it was just something that was kind of magical and beautiful and heart-wrenching and all the things. And after that dream, all of the cold spots in the basement disappeared. The whole energy of the house changed. My mom felt it. My little brother felt it. Everything got lighter. And it was about 2 months after that my mom said, she said, "Hey, I think it's time for us to move. I think we don't need a house like this big. Let's find a smaller house and, whatever." And she's like, "It's time to go." And I was like, yeah. It was like, we joke now that it was like, we were Ghostbusters and called to that house. I mean, for lots of reasons, I suppose, but the place was definitely the place of the opening for me. And so we put the house on the market, and I think it sold in like 3 weeks. Where before, we moved there, it had been on the market forever. And then this time it was time to go. And, this amazing family bought it. And I wonder, they still might be there. I don't know. They lived there for a long, long time. And yeah, it was just a tremendous kind of experience. So that's the thing, and unfortunately, I don't know, you can't, what is hindsight? But if I could go back and talk to myself, then I'd strongly encourage him to not be as afraid and to look at it from a state of greater equanimity, to not be so attached to a story that, she was evil or malicious or wanted to do harm, but that what might have been the most scary to me was just being opened. It felt like the feeling when I think about it now was like somebody just took a hammer and hit the top of my head, and my entire outer casing just split open. And that being stripped away perhaps of some of the illusions, or being given this gift of being more in touch with certain things, it was that it was a gift. And that there wasn't anything to be afraid of. And that maybe that was a spirit that was, she got lost along the way and sensed that I could be open, or that she could communicate with me, and that I might be able to help her. And my fear, maybe slowed down that process of wanting to push her away and keep her away from a place of fear, instead of coming from a place of love, which is probably, maybe if I'm being generous here in the history of it, was the intention that we came from with the Chanupa, because all of the other things of, kind of a house cleansing or a house exorcism, none of that was working. So, what the hell? I don't know. So that was my kind of the beginning of at least of the memory of this one. That was the experience. And a lot of beautiful things happened to me in that house, but that was the story that started it. And, for my mom to be as supportive and amazing as she was is something that, if I think about kids choosing their parents, I chose really well with that. If my calling here on this planet is to share stories like this and to help people to connect to a state of flow and a greater awareness, and to tap into things that might be invisible so that they can feel good and make a great impact, then having her as a mom to be able to support me time and time and time again on the spiritual journey was a great choice. So thank you, Mom. And then, of course, all of the other guides and helpers that showed up along the way. I'm still friends with a lot of the people that I met during those times. And, they still help me when I get confused. So, I don't know. Here's a story for you on this Memorial Day. Let me know what you think. Have you had an experience like this, or have you been turning down the volume on your intuition because you might be afraid? That's like the thing that I just wish there was a little less fear out there. I wish I had been less afraid back then. And, I just don't think that there's anything really to be afraid of. That if you come from love, imagine yourself surrounded by love, and you'll be just fine. And if stuff opens up or stuff gets a little weird, there's people that can help. There's support that's out there. But shutting yourself down and living a life kind of at half-mast is a much harder way to go. And in fact, that's how I ended up getting sick, I think. There's lots of reasons to it, but one of them was that I ended up getting into Stanford. It took me 2 tries, but I ended up getting in part because I was so convinced that I was going to go there. I'd had such a strong vision in that house of me there at Stanford. And I was convinced I was going to get in, even though my guidance counselor was like, don't even bother applying. She's like, you don't have the test scores, and I was like, I don't know. I just feel like it's meant to happen. And so I applied and I didn't get in, and I was shocked. And that's how I ended up at Notre Dame for that first year. And the whole time I was at Notre Dame, I just kept seeing myself out there at Stanford. It was such a bizarre thing. And so I applied to transfer, even though it was harder to get in as a transfer student, but I got accepted. And that was, again, this kind of like following of the vision. So then I get out to Stanford and at one point I was just really tired of getting these intuitions, these impressions and all this stuff. And I just wanted to be a kid who could get drunk or smoke some weed and just chill out and be quote unquote normal. And so I prayed for the things that I was feeling to go away. I just wanted to be numb. And the irony is that, I entered into a ceremony to do that, but that's what happened. And then a month later, I was in the jungle and I got sick, and then I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and, all of that happened. And, there's lots of things that happened around all of that time. So I definitely will not say that it's, a direct correlation. But when I think about why did I get sick and what had to happen in order for me to feel better, I had to finally make peace with being sensitive, with being an instrument, and that I could fight it. And if I wanted to keep fighting it, I'd die. The illness would get worse, and that would just be it. Or I could make peace with it, and I could not be afraid. I could stop resenting, the universe and my choices or whatever, and just get on with it, which is what I ended up doing. And when I started making those kind of choices is when I started feeling better. But it was a long 7 or 8 years, and it was because I shut it down. So if you're listening to this, if you're into it, if you're feeling things, I would urge you to pay attention. You don't have to believe everything. You don't have to act on everything, but do yourself the favor of paying attention. Keep your heart open. Notice what the feelings and the sensations are, and just start paying attention, synthesizing a little bit more information. And then you might be able to see a road that's filled with heart that illuminates before you. And you can choose to step in any direction you want. But if you're pretending that you're not feeling things, or if you're feeling things and you really don't want to, instead of asking it to go away, perhaps the prayer is, how do you handle it in a healthier, more sustainable way? So I'd love to hear your stories. Write in pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com. You can hit me up on Instagram @JamesERoar. And the website that has some of my coaching work is invitinginlove.com. Thank you guys, as always, for being here. It's just such a pleasure to be sharing these stories with you, to hear your successes, to hear what resonates. And man, I don't know, this life is beautiful. It's sacred. And I'm so thankful for every breath that I get to take now. So thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys next time.